We trust stone. We trust marble. We trust the statues in the town square. They look permanent. They look true. But they are liars. Stone is a curated story. It is the story the winners decided to tell. It is a mask. If you want the truth, you have to leave the sunlight. You have to go inside, into the dark, into the archives. Imagine the room, the smell of old paper, vinegar, decay, the dust motes dancing in a single beam of light. It is quiet here, but it is not empty. We are surrounded by ghosts. Thousands of them, stacked on shelves, bound in leather, buried in boxes. These are the plantation ledgers, the account books, the daily diaries of the American South. To the men who wrote them, these were boring books, business records, a list of tools, a list of crops, a list of debts. But to us, these are not business records. These are crime scenes. Open one. Careful. The spine is cracked. The pages are yellow, brittle. Look at the handwriting. It is elegant, cursive, loops and swirls. It looks civilized, but read the words, really read them, and the civilization dissolves. Most history books are afraid of these rooms. They skip the dark parts. They skip the uncomfortable footnotes. We don't. We exist to open the archives they tried to seal. We exist to read the ink they thought would fade. If you believe that the truth is worth digging for, no matter how dark the soil, click that subscribe button for the Silent South. Join us. Let's open the book. Chapter 2. The Anomaly. The ink that never dries. Turn the page. Past the cotton yields. Past the price of corn. Past the inventory of mules and plows. Stop here. Look at this page. There is a name. Let's call her Louisa. The ink is faded, but the name is clear. Louisa. Below her name, there is a list. It looks like a timeline, but it is not a history of events. It is a history of biology. It is a record of extraction. Look at the first date, 1834. A child is born, a boy. The ledger notes it calmly, just an asset acquired. Move your finger down. 1836, another child. 1837, another. Most enslaved women had children spaced out. Malnutrition, overwork, trauma, these things slow the body down. But not here. The list continues. 1839, 1841, 1842. It is relentless. It is a drumbeat. Count them with me. 1, 5, 10, 15, 18. 18 births. One woman, one lifetime. Think about that number. 18. This isn't a family. This is a factory. In the eyes of the man holding the pen, Louisa was not a human being. She was not a mother. She was a biological machine. She was a capital investment. And for 25 years, the machine was kept running. Turn the page, slowly, past the columns of cotton yields, past the fluctuating price of corn, past the inventory of mules, plows, and wagons. You have to look closely, because the crime is hidden in the routine. Stop here. Look at this specific page. The paper is worn thin at the edges. There is a name, written in a heavy, confident hand. Let's call her Louisa.
The ink is faded to brown, but the name is clear. Louisa. Below her name, there is a list. It stretches down the page. It looks like a timeline, but it is not a history of events. It is a history of biology. It is a record of extraction. Look at the first date, 1834. Andrew Jackson is in the White House. The nation is expanding west. And here, in this quiet, humid room, a child is born, a boy. The ledger notes it calmly. Male child, born to Louisa. Value, $50. Just an asset acquired, like a calf born in the spring. No joy, no celebration, just a notation of value. Move your finger down. 1836. The Alamo has fallen. The Republic of Texas is born. The world is changing. But for Louisa, nothing changes. Another child. The handwriting doesn't change. The pen doesn't tremble. It marks the birth like it marks a bushel of wheat. The panic of 1837 crashes the economy. Banks fail. Fortunes are lost. But Louisa is still producing wealth. Another child. Most enslaved women had children spaced out. Malnutrition, overwork, the sheer physical trauma of the field. These things slow the body down. Nature creates a pause. Nature tries to protect the mother. But not here. Here, nature has been overruled. The list continues. 1839, 1840, 1841. The dates march on. While the country argues about slavery in Washington, while the abolitionists scream in Boston, Louisa is here, trapped in this cycle. It is relentless. It is a drumbeat. Year after year, a pregnancy, a birth, a nursing, a pregnancy, a birth, a nursing. There is no recovery. There is only the ledger. Count them with me. 1, 5, 10, 15, 18. 18 births. One woman, one body, one lifetime. Think about that number, 18. This isn't a family tree. This is a manufacturing log. This is a factory. In the eyes of the man holding the pen, Louisa was not a human being. She was not a mother holding a newborn. She was a biological machine. She was a capital investment that paid dividends in flesh. And for 25 years, the machine was kept running.
Let's strip away the romance. Let's tear down the Gone with the Wind curtains. Let's forget the hoop skirts and the mint juleps for a moment. Let's look at the medical reality, the biological cost, the sheer endurance of the human frame. 18 pregnancies. That is a number that defies nature. That means for nearly 3 decades, Louisa's body was never her own. She was occupied territory. She was a vessel. She was either carrying a child, heavy with life, her spine curving under the weight, or she was birthing a child, screaming in the dark, or she was nursing a child, losing her own nutrients to feed another. There was no pause. There was no rest. There was no between. Think about the physiology. Every pregnancy draws calcium from the mother. It draws iron. It draws energy. Louisa was literally dissolving. Her teeth likely rotted as the calcium was leached away. Her bones became brittle. Her muscles wasted away. She was being consumed from the inside out to build the master's wealth. Imagine the seasons passing through the window. The humid, stifling heat of July, heavy with child. The biting, damp cold of January, nursing a newborn by a dying fire. Imagine the silence of the room after the screaming stops.
The smell of iron, the smell of sweat, the smell of fear. Imagine the exhaustion, not just tired, the deep, bone-weary fatigue that never leaves, the kind of tired that settles in the marrow, the strain on her heart, the tearing, the bleeding, the slow, incomplete recovery before it began again. All of this without a hospital, without a doctor who saw her as a patient. To the doctor, she was livestock. The medical manuals of the time discuss the diseases of Negroes as if they were a different species. She received veterinary care, not medical care. No anesthesia, no choice. Why? Why put a human body through this grinder? Why risk the life of the asset? Because of greed. Pure, cold, mathematical greed. In the 1840s, the economy was volatile. The price of cotton fluctuated. It went up and down with the rain in Mississippi or the markets in Liverpool. A drought could ruin you. A flood could bankrupt you. Land prices were unstable. But the price of human flesh? That only went up. It was the only sure bet in the Southern economy. A field hand cost $800 in 1840. By 1860, that same man cost $1,500. A fancy girl, a woman like Louisa, could command $2,000 in New Orleans. A child was worth money the moment they drew breath. A healthy child was worth more. 18 children? Do the math. Calculate the profit. Compound the interest over 20 years. That wasn't just a family. That was a fortune. That was an empire built on biology. Louisa was a gold mine, and the man who owned her, he didn't just own her labor. He mined her. He excavated her. He didn't see a woman. He saw a vein of gold that never ran dry, until there was nothing left but a name in a book. But there is a detail we missed. Go back to the ledger. Look at the column next to the names, the descriptions. This is where the story changes. This is where the business becomes personal.
Before we read those descriptions, we have to understand the cage. Louisa was in a cage, but it wasn't made of iron bars. It wasn't made of chains. It was made of words. Ancient Latin words written on parchment by men in wigs. Partus sequitur ventrem. Written in Virginia, 1662. Copied by Carolina. Copied by Georgia. Adopted by the entire South. 3 words that twisted history. That which is brought forth follows the womb. Let's unpack that. Think about English common law, the law of your ancestors, the law of kings and queens. For 1,000 years in England, a child belonged to the father. It was the basis of patriarchy. If the father was the king, the child was a prince. If the father was a lord, the child inherited the land. If the father was free, the child was free. That was the rule. That was the natural order of Western civilization. But the American slave owners saw a problem. They looked into the future. They knew what they were doing in the dark. They knew they were crossing the line. They knew they were fathering children with enslaved women. If they followed English law, if they followed the law of their own fathers, those children would be free. They would be heirs to the estate. They would be white citizens. The system would collapse under the weight of its own hypocrisy. So they changed the law. They gathered in the state houses. They argued, they debated, and they decided to flip nature upside down. They decided that for this specific group of people, the father didn't matter. The father didn't exist legally. Only the mother mattered. If the mother was a slave, the child was a slave, forever. It didn't matter if the father was the governor.
It didn't matter if the father was the president. It didn't matter if the child had blue eyes and blonde hair. The child followed the womb. This was a legal innovation designed to protect sexual predators. It turned rape into a profitable enterprise. It is hard to listen to this. I know. It is a difficult reality to process. Laws designed specifically to monetize a father's own children. Most channels won't touch this. It's too complex. It's too ugly. But you are still here. That means you value the truth. You value forensic history. Please take a second to like this video. It tells the algorithm that we want accuracy, not just noise. Thank you. So, the law was set. A white man could father 18 children, and legally, he was a stranger to them. They were not his sons. They were his property. They were not his daughters. They were his inventory. He could sell them. He could trade them. He could mortgage them to buy more land. Because the law said he was not their father. He was just their owner. He created a system where his own sin was his greatest profit.
Now, look at the ledger again. Look at the column next to the children's names, the racial descriptors, the words used to categorize the merchandise. Child number 1, mulatto. Child number 5, yellow. Child number 10, copper. Child number 18, nearly white. Read that again, nearly white. These were not the children of a fellow enslaved man. If they were, the descriptions would be different. The records are clear. The consistency is clear. For 25 years, the father was the same man, a white man, the master. Think about the visual evolution. The first child was mixed, but the later children, generations of mixing. They had blue eyes, they had straight blonde hair, they had light skin that burned in the sun. If they walked down a street in New York or Boston, they would pass for French or Italian or just American. But here, in this county, they were slaves. This created a paradox, a visual nightmare for the ideology of the South. The plantation was filled with children who wore the master's face. They had his nose, they had his chin, they had his grandmother's eyes. They walked like him, they laughed like him. They were living, breathing mirrors, reflecting his sin back at him every single day. Consider the fate of these specific children. Historians speak of the fancy trade in cities like New Orleans. This was a specific, high-value market for enslaved women of mixed race, women who looked like Louisa's daughters. Men would travel hundreds of miles to the St. Louis Hotel Rotunda to bid on them. They were not sold for their strength in the cotton fields. They were not sold to harvest cane. They were sold as status symbols for wealthy men, destined for the parlor, not the plow. A field hand might cost $1,000, but a fancy girl, she could command prices of $2,000, $3,000. Louisa's daughters, the ones described as yellow or nearly white, this was their likely fate. Their beauty was not a gift, it was a price tag pinned to their skin. Their very existence was priced according to how closely they resembled the men who bought them. Imagine the psychological toll on the other enslaved people. To look at a child who looks exactly like the man who whips you. To see the oppressor's face on the oppressed. It blurred the lines. It made the lie of racial inferiority impossible to believe. And yet, the lie continued. He looked out the window and he saw himself in chains. And he didn't unlock them.
Where did they live? 18 children. 18 bodies. You can't hide 18 children. You can't put them in the fields with the other hands. They look too much like the family in the big house. It would be a scandal to see a white child picking cotton next to a field hand. It would break the illusion of the color line. It would make the violence too visible. So they lived in the gray zone. Historians call it the shadow household, the back house, the laundry quarters, the rooms above the kitchen. They were kept in the architectural shadow of the main house, close enough to serve, far enough to be ignored, hidden in plain sight. Imagine the physical layout. The big house is a temple, white columns, verandas, manicured lawns. 50 yards away, the quarters, mud, disease, crowding. But in between, the silent spaces, the back stairs, the hidden corridors, the dependency buildings. Louisa likely lived in this limbo. She was a ghost haunting the space between slave and family. She heard the master's laughter in the parlor. She smelled the food she cooked but couldn't eat. Imagine the dinner parties, the heavy, humid southern air, the smell of roasted pork and Madeira wine. The neighbors arrive. Carriages pull up on the gravel. The horses stamp. The ladies in their silk, fanning themselves against the heat. The men in their coats, discussing politics, discussing the price of cotton, discussing the abolitionist threat. They sit on the porch. They drink their tea. And who serves the biscuits? Who pours the wine? A child with blue eyes. A child with straight, sandy hair. A child with the master's nose. A child with the master's chin. The guest looks at the child, then looks at the master. The resemblance is undeniable. It is biological fact staring them in the face. Do the neighbors say anything? No. Does the minister say anything? No. Does the wife say anything? No. They lift their glasses, they sip their wine, they talk about the weather. This is the architecture of silence. The South was built on manners, on politeness, on a code of honor. But it was a hollow code, a rot covered in varnish. The most polite thing you could do was pretend you didn't see the crime happening in front of you. It was a test of loyalty to the system. If you pointed it out, you were rude. You were a traitor to your race. The silence was a wall, and everyone helped build it, brick by brick, silence by silence. To speak the truth was to be exiled, so they all played their part in the play, while the children watched in silence.
Who was he? The man with the pen. We don't need his name to know him. We know his type. We know his class. We know the books on his shelf. He was likely a pillar of the community, a judge who sentenced men to hang, a senator who spoke about liberty in Washington, a vestryman at the Episcopal Church who took communion every Sunday, a man who sat at the head of the table and carved the turkey with steady hands, a man who read the Bible to his family every night by candlelight. He would open the leather-bound book to Ephesians, "Servants, obey your masters." He read it with conviction. He probably believed he was a good man. Imagine him in his study, surrounded by leather-bound books, philosophy, the wealth of nations, the rights of man, theology. He considers himself an intellectual, a man of reason. He writes a sermon on Sunday morning about Christian charity. He writes a letter to his son about honor. And on Monday morning, he opens the ledger. He dips the quill in the ink, and he writes down the name of his own newborn child, and next to it, a $sign. Next to it, a valuation. Next to it, the word slave. How does the human mind do that? How do you fracture yourself like that? How do you read the Bible with one hand and sign a sale document with the other? How do you look into the eyes of your own child and see a price tag?
It requires a cognitive dissonance that is almost psychotic. He had to separate his biology from his business. To him, these were not his children. They were the increase, like the calves in the barn, like the cotton in the field. He didn't see himself as a monster. He saw himself as a provider. He told himself he was feeding them, clothing them. He justified the rape as care. He justified the slavery as divine order. He told himself he was their guardian. And that is the true horror. Not the monster under the bed, but the monster who looks in the mirror and sees a saint. The monster who believes he is doing God's work while he sells his own blood.
And what about her? The wife, the mistress of the big house. She lived in the epicenter. She wasn't blind. She saw Louisa's belly swell 18 times. She saw the babies. She saw the blue eyes. She heard the whispers in the kitchen. She heard the creak of the floorboards at night. She knew. Every pregnancy was a billboard. Every child was a public announcement of her husband's infidelity. It was a humiliation, daily, constant. It was a torture performed in slow motion. She walked through her own home like a ghost, haunting a life that was a lie. She suffered from nerves, from headaches, from female hysteria, the diagnosis of a woman screaming on the inside. The medicine cabinets of the plantation mistress were filled with laudanum, tincture of opium, to dull the pain, to cloud the reality, to help her sleep through the sounds of her husband's footsteps leaving her room. She medicated herself to survive the silence. Mary Boykin Chestnut wrote about this. She was a Southern aristocrat. She wrote a diary during the Civil War. She was brutal in her honesty. She said, "Any lady is ready to tell you who is the father of all the mulatto children in every household but her own." She said they pretended the children dropped from the clouds, like rain, like snow, an act of God rather than an act of man. Why did she stay? Why didn't she burn it down? Why didn't she leave? Because she was trapped too. Differently, but trapped. We have to understand the law of coverture. In the 1840s, a married woman had no legal identity. She was covered by her husband. She could not own property. She could not keep her own wages. She could not sign a contract. She could not even claim custody of her legitimate white children if she left. Her status, her home, her name, her clothes, her food, it all depended on him. If she left, she would be destitute, a social pariah, starving in the street. She was legally an extension of her husband, a finely dressed appendage. So she made a deal with the devil. She traded her voice for her security. She traded her dignity for a roof. She punished the children, perhaps. She hated Louisa. She took her anger out on the innocent because she couldn't take it out on the guilty. But she stayed, and she said nothing. This is the hardest part, the complicity. It takes a village to hide a crime this big. We're building a community here that can handle these heavy truths. If you are still watching 45 minutes into this darkness, I want you to comment "The Silent South" below. Let's see how many of us are dedicated to remembering. Let's see how strong this community is. It wasn't just the house. It was the county. It was the state. The entire society relied on this silence. It was a web that stretched from the courthouse to the church house, and the spider sitting in the center was the institution of slavery itself. The web stretched from the courthouse steps, where the judge ignored the rumors, to the church house, where the deacon looked the other way, to the general store, where the merchants sold fine linen for children who officially didn't exist. Everyone knew, and everyone agreed to the lie. If one man was exposed, the whole system might unravel. Because this wasn't just this plantation, it was the one down the road, and the one across the river, and the one owned by the governor. Genetic testing today proves it. The DNA of the South is tangled. It is a knot that cannot be untied. Black and white are not separate circles here. They're a Venn diagram forged in violence. The open secret was the glue that held the aristocracy together. They protected their own. They created a social contract signed in silence. I won't talk about your shadow family if you don't talk about mine. It was a pact of mutual destruction. If you pull one thread, the whole tapestry falls apart. If you admit that the master is sleeping with the slave, then you admit that the master is a hypocrite. You admit that the Christian gentleman is a lie. And if that lie breaks, the power breaks. But beneath the politeness, there was fear. Deep, primal, shaking fear. They feared slave rebellions above all else. They looked at the horizon and saw smoke. Haiti had revolted and killed the masters. Nat Turner had revolted in Virginia. Every white man in the South slept with a pistol under his pillow. And who did they fear the most? They feared the children, Louisa's children, the mixed-race class. In the racist pseudoscience of the time, these children were terrifying. The masters believed that white blood carried intellect and black blood carried savagery. So in their twisted minds, they had created a dangerous hybrid, intelligent enough to plan a revolt, angry enough to carry it out. They were dangerous because they were often literate. They lived in the house, they heard the news, they read the newspapers left on the table. They knew about the abolitionists in the North. They knew the white world from the inside. They listened to the politics at the dinner table. They knew the master's weaknesses because they carried his DNA. They were a threat to the established order. They were walking, breathing proof that the color line was a myth. You couldn't say black is inferior and white is superior when the person standing in front of you looked exactly like you. So they had to be contained. They had to be humiliated. They had to be reminded violently of their place. Enter the slave patrols, the paddy rollers, the forefathers of modern policing in the South. Men on horseback, torches, whips, dogs. They rode the roads at night looking for anyone out of place, checking passes, enforcing the curfew, enforcing the separation. Imagine the scene. A patrolman stops a young man on the road. The young man has blue eyes. He has blonde hair. But the patrolman knows. He knows who his mother is. And the rage boils over because that boy represents the sin of the father. Even if your skin was white, if your mother was Louisa, you were a target. You were a problem to be managed with a lash. And Louisa, in the middle of this web, she had zero protection. We talk about rights, she had none. The law did not recognize rape against an enslaved woman. It was legally impossible. A man could not steal his own property. She had no standing. She had no court. She had no voice. She couldn't call the police. The master was the police. She couldn't go to the church. The master built the church. She couldn't run. With 18 children, where would she go? The swamps? The North? She was surrounded by a society designed to keep her silent. Her only testimony is this ledger. Her only witness is the ink.
Time passes. It is the only thing we can count on. The patriarch dies. Maybe it was a stroke at the dinner table, mid-sentence. Maybe it was a fever that burned him out in 3 days. Maybe it was the war that finally came to his doorstep with a bayonet. It doesn't matter how he died. It matters what he left behind. The funeral is held. The eulogy is read. A good Christian man, a father to his people, a pillar of the South. Lies, all lies spoken over a mahogany coffin draped in black crepe. The neighbors cry, the widow wears her veil, but in the quarters, there are no tears. There is only terror, because they know what comes next. They know that the death of the master is the death of their world. And then comes the reality, the probate court, the cold, hard bureaucracy of death. The will is read, but the debts speak louder. The estate is insolvent. The lifestyle of the big house was built on credit. The creditors are circling like buzzards. They want their money. And the only liquid assets, the only things that can be turned into cash quickly, are human beings. The appraisers arrive. 3 men with ledgers and pencils. They walk through the house. They value the silver candlesticks. They value the mahogany table. They value the oil paintings. And then they walk out the back door. And they value Louisa. And they value her children. They write a number next to a human life. It is a calculation of muscle, of womb, of future increase. The illusion of family collapses instantly. Louisa and her 18 children are gathered, not for a reunion, but for an inventory. They are lined up in the yard or taken to the courthouse steps in town. It is a public spectacle. The neighbors come to watch, to bid, to speculate. They bring picnic baskets. It is a social event, a day out at the market. The auctioneer steps up. He is a performer. He has a rhythm, a chant. He clears his throat. He doesn't see people with memories and names. He sees lots. He sees merchandise. He reads from the list with a flat, bored voice. Lot 1, 1 iron pot, 50 cents. Lot 2, 1 featherbed, $2. Lot 3, 1 girl, Louisa, age 12, light-skinned, good for housework, $500. Imagine the scene on the block. The buyers step forward. They want to inspect the goods. They touch, they prod, they force mouths open to check teeth. They make the children run to check for limps. It is a violation so casual, it chills the blood. Louisa watches. She sees her children, children she nursed, children she raised, handled like livestock, and she can do nothing. If she screams, she is whipped. If she fights, she is killed. So she stands, and she breaks. The gavel falls. Bang! It is a sound like a gunshot. It creates a silence that lasts for generations. The family is fractured. Child number 1 goes east to a rice plantation in Carolina. The swamps will likely kill him in 5 years. Child number 5 goes west to the sugar fields of Louisiana, a death sentence of labor. Some are sold to pay off gambling debts. Some are bought by speculators who will march them south in chains. And some are bequeathed to the legitimate white heirs. Think about that depravity. Think about the psychological horror. The white son inherits the black son. Half-siblings owning half-siblings. Brother owning brother. Sister whipping sister. They played together in the dirt as toddlers. Now one holds the deed, and the other wears the chain. The blood is the same, but the law draws a line right through the heart. A lifetime of family, 25 years of history, dissolved in an afternoon. The crying stops eventually. The wagons roll away. The dust settles on the empty road. The ledger is closed. The people are scattered like seeds in the wind. And the silence returns to the empty house. The crime is complete.
What happens to a family like this? When the wind scatters the seeds, where do they land? They don't just vanish. They survive. They adapt. They hide. Some of the lighter-skinned children, the ones who looked just like their father, they made a choice. A hard, dangerous, lonely choice. The choice to pass. to step out of the black world and into the white world. Imagine the train station. It is midnight. The air is cold. A young man buys a ticket. His hands are shaking, not because of the temperature, but because he is committing a theft. He is stealing himself. He is stealing his body back from the system that owns it. He boards the train headed north to Ohio or New York or Philadelphia, and somewhere across the Mason-Dixon line he disappears. He sheds his old name like a snake shedding its skin. He invents a new history. My parents died in a yellow fever epidemic. I'm from a small town in Virginia you've never heard of. He perfects the accent. He learns the walk. He crosses the color line. He becomes white. He marries a white woman who never knows the truth. She looks at his curly hair and thinks it's charming. She never suspects its evidence. They have children, and every time a child is born, there is terror. Will the baby be dark? Will the genetic throwback reveal the lie? He holds his breath until the doctor hands him the child. White skin, blue eyes, safe. The secret is buried for another generation. But think of the cost. Think of the mutilation of the soul. To pass, you must kill your past. Passing is a kind of suicide. You have to murder the person you were to birth the person you want to be. You must burn the photographs of your mother. You must never write a letter to your sisters. You must let your family believe you are dead. You let your mother die thinking you are lost to the world. The price of freedom was erasure. The price of safety was silence. Today there are people living in suburbs in Connecticut, in California, in Chicago. They think they're 100% white. They hang portraits of their white grandfathers on the wall. But they are the descendants of Louisa. They don't know her name, but they carry her blood in their veins. The DNA is a time capsule waiting to be opened. And what about those who stayed? The ones who couldn't pass, or the ones who refused to pass? They bore the weight of blackness in the Jim Crow South. They stayed in the blast zone. They walked a razor's edge, too black to be white, too white to be black. They were often treated with suspicion by both sides. The white world hated them because they were a reminder of the sin. The black world sometimes resented them because of their privilege in the house. But they survived. They built families out of the wreckage. They built churches to hold their grief. They built schools to teach the children the laws forbade them to read. They survived Reconstruction. They survived the Klan riding at night. They survived the indignity of segregation. They carried the secret in their faces, but never in their names. They are the living ghosts of the plantation, walking among us today. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, mechanics. The legacy of the 18 is everywhere. We just stopped looking for it because it makes us uncomfortable. We live in the age of data now, the age of the swab, and the secrets that were buried in 1850 are bubbling up in 2024. A woman in Ohio gets a test result. She sees African ancestry she can't explain. She thinks it's a mistake. It's not a mistake. It's Louisa. It's the ink from the ledger finally rewriting the history books. The ghosts are coming home.
The plantation is gone now. The roof caved in first. Gravity won. The rain got in. It was a slow invasion. The wallpaper peeled in strips, like skin. The velvet curtains rotted. The grand staircase, that stage for so much theater, collapsed into dust. The columns, those white pillars of authority, they were just wood, hollow inside. They splintered. They fell. The kudzu didn't care about the master's status. It didn't care about his pedigree. It swallowed him whole. It buried the arrogance in green vines. Drive past that land today. What do you see?
A gas station with flickering lights, a strip mall selling cheap clothes, a quiet street with manicured lawns. The people living there don't know. They mow the grass. They walk their dogs on Sunday. They don't know they are walking on a crime scene. The soil remembers. The bones are still there, silent, waiting, beneath the concrete, beneath the asphalt. The past is pressing up against the bottom of their shoes. But the ink? The ink remains. Paper is more durable than stone. Paper is patient. This ledger is the only witness left standing. It should have been burned. Most of them were burned. When the Union troops came, the ledgers went into the fire first, to hide the debts, to hide the sins. It should have been eaten by rats in a damp cellar. It should have moldered away. But it survived. It refused to die. It sat on a shelf for 170 years, gathering dust, gathering weight, waiting for eyes that could see. Because the truth wants to be found. The truth demands a hearing. It testifies. It screams from the shelf in the quiet archive. It tells us about a system that tried to turn a woman into a machine. It tells us about a system that tried to turn children into currency. The master thought he was writing an inventory. He sat at his desk. He dipped his quill. He thought he was a businessman keeping accounts, credits, debits, assets, liabilities. He was calm. He was rational. He didn't know he was writing a confession. He didn't know he was building the gallows for his own reputation. Every stroke of the pen was a nail in his coffin. He thought he was writing for himself. He was writing for us. He was writing for the jury of the future. And we are that jury. And the verdict is guilty. They thought they could hide it. They thought the silence would last forever. They built walls of politeness. They built laws of erasure. They thought if they didn't write the father's name, no one would know. They thought if they didn't acknowledge the blood would disappear. They thought they could bury Louisa in an unmarked grave and walk away. They thought she would stay buried, but they were wrong. We found the book. We read the names. We lifted the veil. By speaking her name, we deny them that final victory. We deny them the victory of oblivion. They controlled her body. They controlled her children. They controlled her life. But they cannot control her memory. Not anymore. The ledger is open. The light is pouring in. Louisa. We say it. Louisa. We scream it into the silence. The 18 children, we see them, we count them, 1, 5, 10, 18. The silence is not empty. It is full of answers. It is full of ghosts. And now it is broken. Thank you. Thank you for walking into the dark with us. Thank you for listening to the ghosts. Thank you for spending this hour in the archives. If this deep investigation moved you, please share this video. Send it to a friend. Post it. The algorithm prefers short, loud content, but we believe in long, quiet truths. Subscribe for the next investigation. This is the Silent South, signing off.